What's your true supernatural or unexplainable downright creepy story? My family moved to this standard upscale suburban home after roughing it for a couple of years to save up. We also got a deal on the home because it was a model home before it was ours, like it had all the fake furniture to show off the neighborhood homes. Anyways, it had this loft area with 2 stairwells that go up to it, one in the front and one in the back. You could pretty much hear everything from this loft since it was so open. One day my 2 best friends, guy and a girl, are hanging out in the loft. We were in high school, and they were horny and always all over each other, whether I was in the room or not. We were watching TV and I get up to take a piss. When I left, they were all up on each other. When I came back, they were on different ends of the couch. I just thought they had gotten into a fight, so I asked what was up. "Your little sister is home," the dude says. My face turned sheet white. "What's wrong?" the girl asked. I asked them what made them think that. They said they heard her. I am sort of freaking out at this point. "No one's here," I say. We check the house, and I'm right. Well, it turns out that before it was a model home, a family lived there and a little girl had been playing in the loft but had climbed on the railing and fell to her death below. My 2 best friends swear, to this day, that they heard what they thought was my sister laugh and run up the stairs, hitting her hands on each step like she was running up on all 4s. I never had any encounters, other than the fact that right next to where she landed was the house's central intercom. We had an intercom system in every room that you could play music through, or talk to each other. Every so often at night at the same time you'd wake up to the intercom button being pressed, and just the blank sound of static airways like someone was holding down the button but no one was speaking. My room was on the 3rd floor and I'd have to walk down to the bottom to the main unit and turn it off there. I always thought I'd see her. Wow, this reminds me so much of my story. When my sister was 4 and I was 3, we went to visit my grandparents' summer house in the Adirondacks on a lake. My grandmother had inherited the house from her father. It was a beautiful old Victorian built in the 1880s. Once we got there, my sister started talking about a friend she met at the house named Missy. She said Missy lived in the house. My parents assumed Missy was an imaginary friend and at first thought the whole idea was cute. However, my sister became fixated on Missy and the imaginary friend novelty part wore off. At some point during the visit, we drove past a graveyard and my sister started freaking out screaming Missy lives there. My parents decided that they would take my sister to a therapist when we got home. However, my sister never brought Missy up again after we left that summer. About 20 years later, we learned that the house was originally built by a dentist. He had a brother who was a doctor who built a nearby house on the lake. That house still belonged to heirs of the doctor. Our family met the heirs and they told us that the dentist, who had built our house, and his family had abandoned our house after his young daughter drowned off the dock. We never learned the girl's name but wonder if she was called Missy. Last year I was staying in a hotel with my mom. One of the nights as I was laying in bed I noticed a human silhouette maybe 2 meters away from me. I figured it was just a shadow so I tried to ignore it but I couldn't. I turned the light on and obviously it disappeared, but when I shut off the lights again it came back. I tried to convince myself that it was just a shadow, but trust me when I say there was nothing in that room that could have made a shadow like that. I looked around the room several times. It also occurred to me that the shadow wasn't there the previous nights, and nothing had been moved around. It looked just like a human silhouette. I never believed in ghosts, but right then and there I was terrified. I was too scared to look at it so I turned around and eventually fell asleep. I told my mom about it the next morning and she just shrugged it off. She said I was just imagining things. Fair enough. That shadow wasn't there the next night. Or the next. A few days after we had gotten back home my mom was doing something in the kitchen and I was just sitting there studying. Without turning around my mom said, "Do you remember that shadow of a person you saw at the hotel?" I said yeah. My mom just said, "I saw it too." My blood turned to effing ice. Mom didn't want to admit that she also saw it. I thought that she was sleeping, because she didn't want to freak me out. I'm convinced that if ghosts exist, I saw one that night. My mom thinks it was the ghost of her best friend, who had committed suicide just a few days prior. Mom had spent hours earlier that evening writing her a long letter for some kind of closure. Maybe her best friend also wanted to say goodbye. I guess it's not incredibly scary or anything, but it is weird. When I was about 12 our family moved into a new house. New to us, actually quite old. It was in our same village but down a different lane. Part of it used to be a bungalow so my room and my sister's room were on the ground floor, down a long hallway. All of the ground floor had walnut flooring and there was a Persian rug outside the door to my room to avoid cold toesies in the morning. Every night, around 11 or so, I would hear footsteps walking at a fairly slow pace right down the hall, from the end guest suite up, past our rooms, and away down the hall to the living room. I was always in bed when I heard them, and so was everyone else. You know how you can tell who a family member is by the way they walk up the stairs, or open a specific door? I knew it wasn't anyone in my family. Plus, it was the sound of outdoor shoes clacking on the wood, and everyone in my family wore slippers inside the house. I would hear the footsteps start, fairly loud on the wooden floor, way down the hall, come up past my sister's room, and then there would be a pause, while whatever it was walked over the rug. You could hear the gap in the footsteps, about 3 seconds, then they would start again on the other side of the rug and fade out as they walked down the hallway to the living room. Then they would come back, same footsteps, break across the rug, resumed on the other side. I don't remember ever feeling scared, but I never ever went out to see what it was. I would fall asleep to the sound. It would go on for a really long time. It stopped about 3 or 4 weeks after we moved in, and I never heard it again. I didn't really think about it much after it stopped, but I've never forgotten it, and as an adult it makes me shiver to remember it. I'm home alone one day. It wasn't dark or spooky or raining or anything. It was the middle of the day and I had just gotten home from work. Now, I shit with the door open when I'm home alone, since why the F not? I'm doing my business and browsing Reddit as per tradition when I hear my laundry room door open and slam closed. Odd, it's only 2 p.m. and my parents don't get home from work until at least 4. My sister was at school, but maybe she left early. I yell hello, and reach over and close the door so that whoever is home doesn't have to see me shitting. I hear some footsteps walk into the living room, then just stop. I yell again, but no response. My dad listens to audiobooks a lot on his phone, so I figured he walked in with earbuds in and didn't hear me. I finish my business up and walk out to see who was home, and no one was there. I kept yelling around the house, but there was no answer. I walked outside and it was just my car in the driveway. I started to panic a little bit since my laundry room door is quite heavy and is very loud when it closes, so there was no way I misheard something. I searched the whole house, looked outside on the patio, side yards, etc. Nothing. No one was there. I then got this huge feeling of fear and bolted back inside and just sat on the living room couch waiting for something to happen. Nothing happened. No noises, no sounds, no doors opening. Nothing. I eventually got up and went back to my room and never heard anything again. It would have scared the shit out of me had I not taken care of that problem beforehand. When I was in high school, my uncle would throw me a couple bucks to help babysit his kids with my aunt. They lived in a 2-story house by the water, nice area. The kids were about 3 and 6, respectively. One day I was sitting in their den on my phone when I started to hear a baby crying. Thinking it was the 3-year-old, I headed to the bottom of the stairs to check and see if my aunt was up there dealing with it. I called for her a couple times with no response. The baby kept crying. I called for her one more time, and when I got no response I started walking up the stairs. Then I heard my cousins and aunt playing outside. All the hairs on my body stood up and I literally felt a chill run down my spine. I quietly turned around, walked down the stairs, got in my car and drove away. The baby was still crying when I closed the door behind me. A few years later I was drunk at a family party and told my uncle the story. He told me that he and his wife used to hear the baby too, and apparently the previous owners had a kid die of SIDS in that room upstairs. He's uber Catholic and had a mass for the baby. He said after that it never happened again. Still gives me the willies when I talk about it though. My colleague used to work in a hospital and would often receive phone calls around 3 a.m. but no one would speak at the other end of the receiver. The number was from an extension somewhere in the hospital, and when they looked it up, it was from an old morgue nobody has used in a while. My grandmother, who died before either my sister or I were born, was a huge Scrabble player and actually won a regional Scrabble championship for the Midwest United States. When my sister was very young, my parents got out my grandma's old Scrabble set to show her how to play, even though she was too young to spell anything over 3 or 4 letters. The game Scrabble starts by each player pulling 7 tiles from the bag. My sister, who I will remind you was very young at the time, pulls out 7 tiles and says, "What does E-I-L-O-A-R-S spell?" My parents look at the letters and realize that my sister Rosalie, who was named after my grandma Rosalie, pulled her exact 7-letter name from my grandma's Scrabble set. I am an outdoorsman. I'm very experienced in hunting, camping, hiking, and general survival. I'm very familiar and used to wildlife, and I was charged by what I believe was a cryptid called a dogman. It charged me and my cousin. It was not a bear, A bear cannot move how it did, and it was not a normal wolf as they can't comfortably run on two legs, whereas what charged us seemed natural at doing it. I can elaborate further if you wish. This happened around June or July of 2007, I believe. I was around 17 years old and more cocky then, but still somewhat knowledgeable of the outdoors. My family used to own a cabin in northwest Wisconsin. I basically grew up there in the summer. I knew the woods well, but at night it was wise to stay in the cabin or at least by the bonfire by the beach, because of bears, wolves, and cougars. One of the creepiest things was if you were having a bonfire, the tree line was visible from the fire pit and beach, and at night you always felt like you were being watched from that tree line. But during the day the woods always seemed normal, not so creepy, that is, until this incident. So this happened somewhere between 1200 to 1400 hours. Me and my cousin were having an airsoft battle. I was in full woodland camo, he was not. I retreated onto the ATV trail into the woods for a tactical advantage, and our battle took us about 200 meters into about a third of the way up the trail. We had enough at this point and were standing at the edge of a clearing on the trail talking, and he was maybe 10 feet from me, when I decided to mess with him. I shushed him and said, "We're being watched." He froze. Then I realized the woods were dead quiet and I got spooked and started scanning the tree line and the other edge of the clearing from left to right when I saw it. Its teeth gave it away. It was panting and staring at my cousin. I don't expect you to believe me, but what I saw was a wolf as big as a black bear, at least 300 pounds, but it wasn't normal. This wolf was on two legs crouching next to the tree with its arm grasping the tree with a clawed hand, and it had reddish brown fur. I told my cousin that we have to go, and next thing I know he is sprinting. I looked back at Wolfie, who had locked on and sprinted a few steps on 2 feet. I turned and ran when it looked like Wolfie was dropping to all fours. It charged us and sounded like it was right on our asses, barreling through the brush. But for whatever reason, it let us go when we broke out of the tree line and headed for the cabin. What stuck with me the most was the sheer size. Wolfie appeared to be nearly 7 feet tall when upright, and where it should have had front paws, it appeared to have large clawed hands. Now I'm not sure how to explain it rationally. I've heard wolves will occasionally kind of walk upright, but as far as I know they can't sprint on 2 legs, nor do wolves get that big, and black bears more so waddle on 2 legs. The closest description is silly, a werewolf or dogman. Thank you for reading. Growing up, my grandparents had this big, gray German Shepherd called Max. He was a super sweet dog, but my grandparents kept him chained up in the yard and I can't recall anyone ever interacting with him except us kids. When we stayed at our grandparents', I remember bringing leftovers to Max and leaving them in his bowl. My sister and cousins remember this as well. Eventually, my family moved a couple hours from my grandparents, and we saw less and less of Max. He was an old dog to begin with, but I recall he started developing tumors around his neck. Then one day he was gone. I brought up Max to my dad years later as a teenager, wondering what, exactly, he died of. We had a dog that had died recently, and his tumors reminded me of the ones Max had. My dad seemed real confused that I knew who Max was. He said Max had died of cancer, but he was my dad's first dog, which I was confused by, since he mentioned a dog named Boots when he was a kid. He said that Boots was the dog his parents bought to replace Max, who died when he was 9. I was sure he had gotten mixed up, or misremembered the dog. Here's where the story gets weird. My cousins and my sister all remember this dog. I could swear he was dead by then, but even my youngest cousins remember Max. Here's where it gets effing insane. Where Max was chained up was a concrete platform. When, we thought, he died, my grandparents put a tool shed there. Further lending to the confusion, there are pictures of me and my cousins near my age. I'm the oldest grandchild, but my youngest cousins are 12 years younger, playing with the shed in the background. The fact that my cousins remember the dog makes no sense on that basis alone. That's not the insane part about that shed, though. When I was a teenager, probably 18 or 19, I helped my dad and my uncles tear down the shed. On the concrete platform, right on the edge, was a child's handprint with my dad's name written underneath, and a big, German Shepherd-sized paw print. Underneath the paw print, in the same handwriting, was the name Max. To this day, none of us know why all of us remember this dog. I was born in the late 80s, this dog died in 1969.